Today, we have with us Kim, who is the first female featured on Forged with Fire on the History Channel, and she makes knives. Welcome to the podcast, Kim. Please tell us a little bit about what you do.
Like you said, I make knives, but I started off making jewelry. So I consider myself a jewelry designer as well as a knife maker. I also just do basic blacksmithing, just making hooks and floor standing coat racks or other things that are functional. But I also do sculptural objects as well. So I do a little bit of everything. I also work with leather because as a knife maker, I like to give sheaths with my knives so that people don't cut themselves. So I'm working with leather is also something I enjoy.
So, for some of us who have a basic understanding of what blacksmithing is, can you walk us through the steps of the process?
Blacksmithing is working with steel usually while it's hot. So you're wearing gloves, tongs, or instead of your hands. So it's very different than like something like jewelry design where you anneal things, which means to heat it up and then let it cool down,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can use your hands to manipulate as well as other tools. But while blacksmithing, you have to use tongs or everything's worked while it's hot because steel is obviously the strongest metal
Yeah.
in my mind, and just kind of understanding the basics of things. But it's a lot of hammering and hammering control. I feel like a lot of people who even have signed up for my classes that I offer will not understand necessarily how much hammering is involved, but it's primarily hammering.
Okay.
So, and it's just finding that control in hammering is the majority of blacksmithing.
Okay. And when you say hammering, is it physical manual hammering, or are they devices that you
Yeah.
can use?
Well, we do have other assistive machines like the hydraulic press or a power hammer, but essentially it is down to you and a hammer. And so understanding your own strength and control, and then also being able to use your body sort of like a machine, like cantilever. So you're kind of positioning yourself so that the weight of the hammer is dropping, bouncing off, and that way you can kind of keep going
Right.
for a lot longer.
The generic images of like a man holding a big hammer and that. So the image of like lots of physical strength. From what you're describing, it sounds that the technique is a bigger part of it. So is there like a balance? I'm assuming you need some amount of strength, but do you think technique is more important than strength?
There's a lot of guy blacksmiths or women I've also talked to, but it's not necessarily how heavy your hammer is. It's just understanding the control of it. And yes, I might not be able to hit nearly as hard as somebody who's like 6'5" and 200 more pounds than I am, and really just go
Of
at it.
course.
But at the same time, I'll eventually get there.
And so here you are actually working with molten metal.
Not molten
No,
metal, but hot metal.
hot metal. Okay.
I in jewelry design stuff, I do melt metal for casting.
Sure.
Yeah, but when you're working with steel and making a knife blade and stuff like that, you're actually just working it while it's really hot, but not near melting.
And how do you decide which piece is good for heating up? How much time does it take to make?
Recently, I just worked with a friend of mine, Joe. He showed me actually how to make feather Damascus, which
Okay.
is amazing. It's a pattern that like it's put into the metal by manipulation. Sort of, it's a Damascus. If you're familiar with that, it's like folded layers. So this is a different technique for combining those layers into a patterned feather look at the end. But it was made of 1095 and 15 in 20. 15 in 20, actually, the N stands for the nickel content.
Okay.
So when your final blade comes out, you're etching. The nickel actually doesn't get etched. It remains shiny and silvery looking, whereas everything else can be etched. So you're gonna have different depths and then as well as colors. Like so, usually put it into a coffee bath at the end so that it really pops those colors out, and that's like the metal steel 1095 is taking on that coffee stain, whereas the nickel won't. So that offers a contrast. But I ordered 15 and 20 and 1095 from a local place that I picked it up from. And then you just kind of stack layers, same size pieces, and then weld those together, and then forge them down, getting all the pieces to size and to forming the billet that you're welding shut. That takes a couple of hours.
Oh wow.
So
Okay.
you're already invested. And
Okay.
then actually smashing them down, getting them to adhere correctly, that's maybe an hour. It's a lot of time. And that's why Damascus tends to be so expensive, especially like a patterned Damascus. It becomes really expensive as well. Then we smashed it down. We kind of did it in this way that creates C shapes, like kind of rounded shapes on the outside, which you can see as you're working. And then cut those again and then restack them after cleaning them as well, which is another few hours. And then you re-weld it and then you re-smash them down. So that's a very lengthy process. Then you draw it all out and then you have something to work with.
Yeah.
But then I brought that back to my studio and then I made the knife. So hammering out a knife blade out of that billet that we made still took me a couple more hours. So it's already like 15 hours.
Invested, yeah. Just to create that material took that much time. Wow.
Yeah. That's why not everybody does Damascus. And then, I could have just used 1095. I could have just used 15 and 20. That's a fun process because at the end you get to see this really cool pattern.
So, outside of the aesthetic part, is there another purpose to the layering? Is there a historical reason, or does it do something to the blade?
A lot of people believe that it's the strongest metal because it's going to have more retention and the blade will stay sharp. I don't really find much difference in between using just a high carbon steel knife versus a Damascus knife. I mean, I feel like my edges stay always, pretty sharp. I haven't had many complaints. Not really for sure what the general thoughts are on it anymore, but I know that that's historically that they thought it was the stronger material. It's just really
cool. The forge that you heat the metal on, is this something that can be done like in a garage or like in a house, like near a residential area, or does it have any?
Yeah, as long as your neighbors don't hate you for hammering. I have a double burner forge that's propane, so it's just like a grill propane tank.
Okay.
And then, you have to be mindful where your flames are shooting out of your forge, but they're not going to be catching stuff on fire. So you have to be smart, use common sense, have a fire extinguisher around. But exercise safety precautions as much as possible. I'll open my garage door. I'll fire it up. My neighbors are all who work 9 to 5, so usually I don't have too many problems with complaints about my hammering. Nice. But I also don't hammer past like 8 p.m. Yeah.
Very cool. What kind of knives do you typically make? I know very little, so please feel free to educate me on the basic.
I do an annual knife show for my knife club, and some of the guys will make comments like, "Oh, well, you make mostly kitchen knives," and I'm like, I don't actually really make kitchen knives at all. I don't know where you got that from, but I make a lot of machetes. I find it's a lot more fun for me if I know the purpose. Like I've had people request these machetes because of their conditions, like around their home, where they want to use it. And I actually used 2 machetes at one time to clear off our makerspace or back lot. And I felt like a ninja for the first time. It was amazing. Cool. I cleared so quickly, and it was really fantastic feeling. I just think I have things now in my head where I love playing with machetes. So it's a kukri style machete. It's got a heavy forward part of the blade, so it helps with the force coming in. But it's a lot of fun. So that's what I like to make. But then I also find myself making a lot of like hunting style knives or like fixed blades for everyday use. It's mostly what I make.
And you, this is something you do full time?
I do this. I do pop-up shows, sales like that. I also have a couple of stores that sell my stuff, but then I also teach at Craft Alliance, which is a craft school here in St. Louis.
I mentioned earlier that I used to run a children's makerspace, so I'm a big fan of how the pedagogical side works, how we teach other people to make. And when we used to work with kids, we compartmentalized into 3 general steps. One was the ideation process. Then we take the ideas and then put them into a design. So teach the design stage. Typically, we would use CAD. and then would come the making of the manufacturing side, which in our case would be 3D printing or laser engraving or CNC times. So I'm always curious about the ideation stage because a lot of artists and craftspeople, when I talk to them, the lines kind of blurred. But do you actually have a process to capture like ideas? So when you mentioned the Damascus knife, for example, did you have a plan? Did you sketch it, pictures saved, or notes? Like, do you have that? Do you have that side of like a more formal or at least like a process that you're following with?
I don't specifically. I
Okay.
kind of just get a curiosity,
Uh-huh.
and then I want to learn. And so then I asked my friend Joe to show me. Joe is very precise in
Okay.
his approach. He doesn't necessarily sketch ahead of time, but he's got a plan. He
Mm,
sticks to it.
mm.
But me, I'm like, let the metal speak to me, uh, kind of go with the flow. Um, I always say happy accidents while working
Uh-huh.
because you never know where it's going to take you. So I very much kind of wing it. There's on occasion, if I have a request for something specific, I'll do sketches. I have a
Right.
client, so I definitely plan it out better than.
So in your case, like there's no formal design step, like say for example the one I talked about. There's no actual mocking it up in CAD or anything like that, right? You're pretty much like you've got the raw metal, and then when you start working on it, you're kind of moving along the design as you let the metal speak for itself, right?
I mean, again, I will do those things when it comes to like as far as kind of exploring and doing my own thing. It's I definitely just like to just start hammering. It's kind of like a sharpened pencil. If I see a sharpened pencil, it's like I want to write with it. So if I see blank metal, I'm just like, ooh, just pick it up.
What is the kind of range of metals that you worked with in making knives? What's more basic and what's more exotic, or what's more unattainable and what's more common? I'm trying to get a sense of what the landscape might be.
Well, so I do teach a cheese knife making class
Okay.
at Craftsmanship, and it starts off with mild steel,
Uh-huh.
and mild steel is softer. It's easier to hammer on. It's easier to manipulate. So that's a real basic. I mean, it doesn't heat treat or harden in the same way that like a real knife should,
Okay.
but it's a cheese knife. So you can murder cheese with this knife, but you can definitely cut through cheese.
Okay.
And then as you get into like 1095, 1085, even there's higher goes up with your high carbon steels. So they're going to get harder to hammer, harder to manipulate, but they work hard at the end. And you can treat them by a heat process so that they become really, really strong. And then there's alloys of those, of course. And then you have really exotic steels that have alloys added into them, like CPM 1154, or like there's all these acronyms and for different types of steels. But some of them will take even heat at this much for the heat treating part, which is hardening it.
Okay.
So you'll need a heat treat oven that can hold a temperature and the knife blade at this temperature for 30 minutes, and put it into a dry ice bath for like 20 seconds, and then bring it back out. And then there's some really intense, rigorous, like where you have to have the dry ice buckets and then the even heat kiln. There's really intense processes for certain metals.
Okay.
I don't really deal with those kinds of metals because it's a lot of more stuff, like more, machines, more equipment that I just don't have. A lot more patience and time.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
What's your favorite like to work with, and also what would be? I mean, I know you mentioned machetes, but is that your favorite style that you like making now?
So I like free metal, anything that doesn't cost me much money,
Okay.
which I like to recycle metals.
Sure.
My buddy does not necessarily like to do that
Uh,
because he's selling higher end knives,
okay.
where I don't mind so much. I mean, machetes don't need to be made out of like top dollar steels
Right.
because of the jobs that they're doing. So I just like obtainable, recycle materials, things like truck springs, car springs, lawnmower blades, those are all kind of good steels to work with. And you can spark test those pretty easily just to see the carbon content actually acts like sparkler.
Okay.
When it has a higher content of carbon, it like even those sparkles will have little sparkles coming off of them. So more sparkles that you have, the higher
Yeah.
the content.
What types of blades do you like making? Like, do you have a
Oh,
specific favorite kind?
well, anything kind of fixed blade, which means the handle is a part of it, because that's also a fun portion is to figure out what kind of handle materials I want to use.
Uh-huh.
And then that's where a lot of creativity comes in, and a lot of color and a lot of other things that can be included in the knife. So machetes so far have been some of my favorites to me.
In the intro, I mentioned that you're the first female knife maker to be featured on Forge and Steel. So, how did that happen? And tell us a little bit about your backstory. Like, how long have you been making? How did you get started?
Well, so Forged and Fire, the show called me. They found me, I think, on LinkedIn.
Oh, okay. Wow.
I was working for a local knife maker here in St. Louis at the time, and I had to change my title on LinkedIn to help him at a women's business conference.
Okay.
So I put assistant knife maker as my title. I must have been the only one that ever had anything that dealt with knife in their business title because they called me. And then I said, "Oh, I don't really make knives." They're like, "But could you?" And I was like, "Well, sure, I could give it a good shot." I was blacksmithing at the time, so that's not a big deal. And so I tried it. I made a nice looking object, and then showed it to them a few days later. And then they were like, "Okay, next is a Skype interview." And so I did a Skype interview, much like this,
Uh-huh.
but I am very animated at the time. They chose me that year. So, and that was the first, they already aired first season. And so this was the beginning of the second season that I was on.
Okay.
I think they were getting a lot of fluff for not having women the first season.
I bet.
Yeah. And I never asked exactly how they found me, but that could be the only way that they found me.
I bet. I bet. No, that sounds a lot of fun. So, how did you get your start? Like, when did you start making knives?
Well, so right after that show, I again had not been making knives.
Yeah.
And the first knife I actually made was live on television.
Wow. That's a wild story.
It wasn't live television, but it was naturally aired television.
Sure. Yeah.
So after that, I started making knives. I saw it more of as a challenge for myself. And I actually I was eliminated second, which that was not that bad for me because at least it wasn't first.
Yeah.
And all the guys that were on the show with me, the fellow contestants, they were awesome. And up until I even went on the show, I actually met with other blacksmiths that did show me some of the ropes, like some things that I would probably encounter as making a knife on television. So I got a lot of help from just the community of blacksmithing, which is awesome.
Nice.
Blacksmiths are really friendly, even though they're intimidating kind of guys, typically mostly guys. I have never had anybody turn me down. If I've ever asked them to show me something, they're like more than willing to open up their studio.
Very cool. That also sounds like a lot of makers. One of my mentors, he runs a maker space, and he's like, the best thing I like about makers is that makers are nice people. You mentioned earlier that you were also doing jewelry making. So did that come first? So I mean, I'm assuming that you had some skills before you just got started in knife making, right?
I started off in college with jewelry. I actually wanted to make furniture, and yeah, they were like, we don't do sculptural objects that are like functional here. Like you can't do that. We only do sculpture. And so they're like, try something like jewelry. And I was like, well, fine, I guess. Not my thing. But the first project we got assigned, I was like in love with it. Finished early. It's like, give me more. It was a riveting project, just cold connections, but it was just a lot of fun. So similar techniques to like building or construction, as in most things, but just on a smaller scale.
Compared to sculpting, what was the appeal of jewelry making?
For me, it's having a mental confinement and finding my own voice within that, or my own creativity in that. So like a ring, we know is like around the finger,
Mm.
but is it closed? Is it opened? I mean, what does it have to be minimally to be considered a ring? So I like to just have something that like kind of hones me in, like just kind of has me focused a little bit
Right,
more,
right,
because like
right.
I also find the expression in being in those like confined rules and ideas.
So you kind of have that sort of bounding box within which to work in, whereas I imagine with sculpting, it's kind of like you can do pretty much anything. You also mentioned that you make sheets. So was that just like a natural progression, or again, because I can see sheets are also can be not just protective, but also decorative, right? Because you have mentioned the handles part. So do you think there's the jewelry influences kind of coming into your handles and your sheets, maybe?
Oh, absolutely. Other than like trying to figure out exactly how to make a direct correlation between like my knives and my jewelry, which I'm still working on. Um, Sheets offer me that expression sort of too, and they're kind of like almost like a canvas. So if I can't convey the ideas that I want to necessarily in the knife or the knife handle, then the sheath gets it.
Okay.
Um, it's fun because I can use. I don't like when you go into like Lowe's or Home Depot or something where you say, "Hey, I have this that I'm trying to make," you know,
Mm.
and then would this tool work? And they're like, no, this tool is only for this.
Right,
Like they get
right.
really just
Yeah.
this is what this tool is for. But then I'm like, well, okay. Um, so I like taking tools from all sorts of things I've done in the past and then being able to incorporate using those into other things. So I found that my linoleum cutter from taking printmaking classes actually carves leather just as easily too.
Okay.
So I can carve designs into that. I can, stamp stuff into it. I mean, there's so many ways to like be creative with leather. So,
I mean, do you find that when you're doing the sheets specifically, do you kind of, because you mentioned about sort of the box that you work within, do you find that you usually, your mind is like, oh, this is going to be a derivative piece? And so there's like, you try to keep like a theme going, or do you kind of treat the sheath as an independent object? Because the functional part is already there, right? Like if it fits the knife, it serves
yeah,
the function. So how do you
yeah.
normally treat, like, what's your mindset then?
Well, I think I try to incorporate each sheath with the knife. Like, so I use a lot of corn on the cob for handles for my knives.
Okay.
So in the past, the sheaths have gotten things like a scene of cornfields. So I painted
Okay.
it. Like
Uh-huh.
I actually like literally painted cornfields. Um, or I'll just like make it look like a corn cob. Like put details in it that are just really fun, like kind of corny. I always try to make them relate relative to each other. So
What's the most like memorable piece that you've made so far?
it was probably my first corn on the cob with rasp uh, file knife.
Okay.
So it had these diamond kind of like from the rasp itself, like just banging out that. It gave it this diamond pattern to it. And then the corn on the cob handle, which, because I think it would be obvious, but it's not. It looks very reptilian or snake like. And so it sold after the third person saw it.
Wow.
They were like, I have got to have this. It was a pretty awesome knife. It was pretty.
Craftsperson would be like really a good term to describe this type of work. Where do you think the line is between somebody who's a craftsperson and an artist in this type of field?
I mean, they do have things called art knife shows
Okay.
as well.
Okay.
I feel like I'm more of a crafter just because I want people to use my knives.
Mm.
I want my knives to be part of their everyday. I don't
Okay.
want them to be held in such high regards that they're like on a pedestal somewhere being just viewed only under glass. That's how I make my stuff. I want it. I mean, if you tell me that you don't use it, it's like the most upsetting thing ever because why did I spend so much time? Should have charged you way more.
Also, if you're comfortable, can you give us a sense of like what maybe knives retail at, the ones that you make?
The ones that I make, I'll make small neck knives. They can go from like this size.
Okay.
They'll go like $100 to $150. I mean, it depends on what I make it out of. But then I'll have larger knives that are just a couple $100. I mean, I've got friends that have knives that are like nothing less than 1,100.
Wow.
And it's worth it. They're worth it. They've got great work. But I personally like to make things that I would be able to afford as well. So I keep things really reasonable. I'm not trying to make mansion payments or anything like that.
I don't know that much about knives, so this has been educational for me. But I have noticed on social media and even in affairs, I've seen a real uptick in interest in making of knives. So, from your knowledge, do you think that that is true? Is there definitely like an uptake? Like, are people more interested? And why? Why do you think that's happened?
It's primarily because of the show Forged in Fire
Okay.
on History Channel. So when it was season 2, there were like 10 episodes tops.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're in season like 11 or 12,
Wow.
and they have like 30 episodes or something like that per season now. And I've had other knife makers come to me and say, "Oh, I got my start because of watching Forged in Fire."
Wow.
They learned everything that they know from watching that show. And there's also like, you can tell when you're trying to buy an anvil. They used to have anvils on Craigslist for like $50. Come and get it.
Mm.
But now they're like, oh, it's $700.
Okay.
Yeah, so it started to become harder to find these kind of materials and
Right.
pieces of equipment. So everybody noticed when that started happening, and obviously it's becoming a lot more popular. There's a huge interest in it, so which is great.
Earlier you mentioned a couple of different types of knives. So, is there like a knife that you'd like to make?
Locking folder knife.
I
So
don't
a
know what.
folding knife,
Uh-huh.
you can, like a pocket knife, but something that's got like a nice mechanism in it that just it's easy to flip open and then clicks shut. It's got that good sound, that good feel. It's easy to operate with one hand. All of that is very technical.
Okay.
So I've worked with a couple of people to try to get to that point, but their best recommendation from them is that you need to make 10 at a time to really get good at it.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, that's a lot of material that I'm screwing up and making completely useless in order to do that. So, and it's a lot of time. I've not had either of those. I've never had enough money or time to just screw up 10 knives.
No, that's so. I mean, basically, like the implication is that your 10th knife would be like the version that you would actually come up with. Wow.
Yeah, hopefully.
Wow.
I mean,
That's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot.
I've traced a pattern from one of the best knife makers in this state and tried to just replicate it with like cardboard, sort of, just to see.
Mm.
And I can't even come close. Like, it's the curvature, it's everything that has to come together with precision. Wow. It's almost like I should be a machinist in order to do this.
Wow. Okay. Jeez. Wow. That sounds pretty difficult.
It's daunting. And so it's kind of like, I want to be able to get there one day.
If I were trying to make my first knife, what would be some advice that you'd want to give?
Well, figure out your purpose first, what you would actually want to use it for. Because even within the kitchen knife realm, there's the chef knife, there's just like the kind of utility knife, which is like, stuff you can peel your apples, your potatoes, cut little vegetables here and there. Then there's petty knives, which is sort of also like a good kind of in-betweener. Chef knives, I feel like that's like kind of just going straight from like having a bicycle to like a Camaro, or like a Porsche or something, like, right. So it's like, that's 0 to 700. But I feel like figure out what style knife you'd like first, and start off small. But that's why cheese knife, that's why the mild steel making cheese knife is also a big class. Sure. Because you get the ideas down, hammering kind of feel. And you still end up making something that works, right? Like you can use it. Yeah. And then in the United States, I think Havana is our national like blacksmiths association
Okay.
group. And in almost every state, there's some affiliate for the state of which people are living in. So, like Missouri, we have the BAM,
Okay.
Blacksmiths Association of Missouri. But I know there's some for every state around us anyway. But you can typically find a class through them or get somebody's name from them on who you can call.
So, like, what is it that keeps you wanting to make more?
I think it just makes me happy and proud, sort of, to know that I've made something that somebody's using that's helpful. I just for some reason I think functional arts are great. They provide, you know, a means to an end. I don't know. So it's sort of sad. Mm-hmm.
And so what's next?
Neon. My friend here makes neon sculptures, lights, and such.
Okay.
It's always something I'm curious about. So, and then how I can incorporate miniature neon lights into my jewelry or into my knives. That'd be so awesome.
That would be wow. That would be so cool.
Yeah.
And like if you had a assigned percentages to your work, how much time do you think you spend in jewelry making versus say knife making?
I try to do about 50-50, honestly.
Oh, okay.
But it just kind of depends. I actually have multiple projects going on all at the same time. So I'll be at my jewelry desk and then I'll get up and then I'll see something that's knife related and then I get totally sidetracked and then start working on that stuff for like the next rest of the day or whatever. But I think it's about 50-50.
Okay. Very cool. I know that you're traveling for the Maker Faire in Louisiana in Shreveport. What are you going to be doing there? Are you going to are you doing a session? Like, tell us about what that participation is going to be.
So I will demo a little bit of knife making earlier in the day on Saturday, and then I'll be offering sign up. But it's because it's only my own setup I'm bringing. I don't have multiple anvils, multiple forges. I can only allow for 2 people at a time to come and hammer something out. I'm thinking that they'll probably just be making some basic hooks.
Okay.
But it'll give them a taste and idea of like what it is to be like a blacksmith and how to do it. So we'll have like 3 sessions offered because it's only that one day.
Right.
So it's like a 12 to 12:30, and then 1 to 1:30, and then a 2 to 2:30, so people can sign up. So in order to sign up, they just have to get to my booth kind of early.
Okay, fantastic.
Which I don't mean to make it such a demanding thing, but it's the only way I can think about being able to allow people to also workshop.
Thank you again, Kim. It was great having you on the podcast, and thank you so much for educating me and hopefully a bunch of our viewers about knife making and jewelry making.
Thank you. See you in Shreveport.